All right, so now moving on to the next part. Okay, now till now what we have done is we were here fetching the studies, right? Oh sorry, we were searching the studies, and this is the function that we wrote for it. Okay, now we're going to fetch one study by ID. Okay, fetch study by ID. Okay, so again I'll just create the function. Okay, I'll call this as fetch study. Okay, and it takes the NCT ID. Okay, and returns a dictionary. All right, else none. Okay, all right, so first and foremost, what does this function do? Okay, this function fetches the complete record for one specific study. Okay, fetches the complete record for one specific study. Let's say you want to take the specific, or rather by its NCT ID, let's say you want to fetch one complete record of a, let's say you are searching for a study on protein powders. So it will fetch that one complete record for your specific study that you're looking for. So let's say there is a study which says that creatine supports cognitive function. Okay, or rather it reduces the risk of Alzheimer disease by 30%. You are looking to fetch that particular research study, so it will do that with the help of NCT ID. Okay, and NCT ID is what? It's a unique identifier. Okay, that every research study gets when it registers on clinicaltrials.gov. Okay, it is basically NCT followed by 8 digits, right? That is how it works. Okay, and what is the argument that we're taking here? We're taking the argument as NCT ID, which is the research studies unique identifier. Okay, and what does it return? It returns a dictionary with all the studies details. Okay, and it returns none if the study was not found. Okay, so cool, let us just log it. So I'll just say logger info, and I'll say fetching study, and we'll also take the NCT ID. Okay, so NCT ID is what I will be pushing in here. Okay, after that I'll just create an internal helper function called get study. Okay, and this is the inner function that we are going to create. Okay, which makes the actual HTTP get request, which makes the actual HTTP get request. Okay, all right, and we define it as a regular non-async function. Okay, because the request is synchronous, we cannot use async await here. Okay, so we will run this inside async io.to_thread. I'll show it to you. Okay, so this function is synchronous in nature, and what does it return? It returns from the session we get, what do we get? First and foremost, the base URL, okay, /studies/NCT ID. Okay, so you will get a long URL /study/NCT ID. So we'll be fetching it basically from this URL and that particular NCT ID. Okay, fantastic, we are going well. Okay, then see, yeah, okay, and I'll keep the timeout as the request timeout that we have defined. Okay, which is 30 seconds. Yeah, okay, and then I'll just say try. Okay, and I'll say await, sorry, I'll just say await async io.to_thread. Okay, and I'll say get study. Okay, so if you see here, async io.to_thread that we are writing here, okay, this runs the get study synchronous function in the background thread. Okay, and this is how we make synchronous requests work in the async code. Okay, So the main program does not freeze while waiting. It can handle other tasks as well while the thread fetches the data, and that is what we are doing here. Okay, so first and foremost we also need to so I'll just say response dot raise for status. Okay, raise for status is yeah, raise for status is nothing but it's the just a function that is going to help us check if the HTTP status code indicates an error, right? So this is just to give us an HTTP status. Let's say HTTP status is 200, which means success, right? Continue. 404 not found, then it is going to raise the HTTP error. If it's status 500, then it's a server error, again raises an HTTP error, right? So we're going to return the response in JSON. Okay, all right, and then I'm just going to write the exception code, except requests dot exceptions dot HTTP error. Okay, and then I'm just going to log it. So I'll just say logger dot warning, and I'll just say study not found. Okay, study not found for this particular NCT ID. Okay, and then I'll just say what is the status. Okay, which is, how do we write it? E dot response dot status code. Okay, so this is where we get the status code. Okay, and we return none. Okay, all right. Okay, and then one more exception. Okay, let me just call in here except exception as E. Okay, and then I'll just say logger dot error, logger dot error, and I'll say failed to fetch study. Okay, and which study? So for that we need to take the NCT ID. Okay, so I'll define the NCT ID here, and what was the error that we received? Okay, that also we need to put in here. Okay, all right, this looks fine. Now we'll define a private method, okay, for build, called as build search parameters. Okay, or build search params, whatever you like to call it. Okay, so I'll just say define this will be called as build search parameters. Okay, here I'll be passing self condition, which is string, else none, then intervention. Now this is something that we've already defined, okay, earlier. Okay, intervention none, then I'll be passing the sponsor string, else none, status, which is going to be a list of string, okay, else none, and I'm also going to take the page token, else none. Okay, and yeah, I think this is fine. And what does it return? It returns a dictionary. All right, just a minute. Okay, all right, so now what does this do? This basically, this function builds a query parameter dictionary, builds the query parameter dictionary, okay, for one API request. Okay, now the clinical trials.gov API expects specific parameter names. Okay, and this method basically translates our friendly Python arguments into the exact parameter name that the API understands. See, that is equally important. okay, Python arguments to be changed into the query parameter names, which our API will be able to understand. Condition is nothing but the medical condition. Intervention is nothing but the drug or treatment filter. Sponsor is nothing but the sponsor organization filter. Status is nothing but the list of status values to filter by, and page token is nothing but the cursor for the next page of results. And what does it return? It returns a dictionary of query parameters that are ready to send to the API. Okay, so here first and foremost I'll just say parameters, params dictionary, okay, string slash any, not slash, comma any, okay, and page size. I'll explain what this is. I'll just say page size, okay. Now here, what does it return in parameters? Basically in dictionary it is returning how many results per page, okay, and we always set this explicitly. We never trust the API defaults. I think the default is 10. You have to recheck. I think the default is 10, which would be very slow for 100+ studies. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to define the format. How do we want the output to be? I want this in JSON. Okay. So, and after this, I'll just say if condition, okay, and in params query.condition equals to condition. If you can recall at the start, I had explained you query.cond, which is query.condition, is the clinical trials GOV parameter name. Now this parameter name is specific to clinical trials.gov API for searching by the medical condition, and it searches across different condition names and their synonyms. For example, if you are saying diabetes, then it will also find for type 2 diabetes mellitus. Okay, so that is what it will take care of. Okay, and then I'll say if intervention, then in parameters I'll just say query dot intr equals to intervention. Okay, which means query.intr searches by intervention, which is the drug or the treatment name. For example, let's say you're searching for semaglutide, so it will find the studies with respect to semaglutide. Okay, then I'll say if sponsor, okay, just a minute, sponsor, and then I'll say params query dot spons, okay, and then I'll say sponsor, which means query.spons is going to search by the sponsor organization name. For example, Pfizer will find all the Pfizer related studies. Reckitt-Benckiser, which makes Dettol, will find all Reckitt-Benckiser related or Reckitt-Benckiser sponsored studies. Okay, and I'll say if the status, okay, so I'll just say parameters dot filter dot overall status equals to dot join status. Sorry. Okay, so here what we are doing is filter dot overall status filters by the study status. Okay, now clinical trials.gov API uses pipe as a separator. Okay, which is now what can be the status of the research study. It can be completed, recruiting, etc, etc. Okay, all right, and then I'll just say if page token, then in parameters I'll say page token equals to page token. Okay, and this is the cursor token for the previous page's response, right? Sending this tells the API that give me the page after this particular token. That is what it means, right? Without this, the request would return the first page again. Okay, so it's like you give the token, you understand, okay, there's a next page, now go to the next page. That is what it means. Okay, and finally what do we return? We return params or the parameters. Okay, all right, and then I'm going to define a private method. Okay, I'm going to define a private method which is fetch one page with retry. So let me write it. Am I in the right this thing? Just give me a minute. Fetch studies. async. All right, and now in here I'll just say retry. Okay, and in retry I'll just say stop equals to stop after attempt max retries. If you actually go through it slowly, you will understand what we are trying to do here. Okay, we are saying to stop retrying after max retries, which is 3 in total. So stop after trying for 3 times. Okay, and after 3 failures we give up and we return none. Okay, then I'll say wait equals to wait exponential. Okay, and then I'll say multiplier equal to 1 and minimum equal to 1, maximum equal to 8. Okay, this means this is exponential backoff. Okay, you wait between the retries using exponential backoff. Okay, it means that after the first failure wait for 1 second, after the second failure wait for 2 seconds, after the third failure wait for 4 seconds. If you see, we have capped it at 8 seconds, right? So we give server more and more time to recover with each retry. Okay, that is what we are doing here. All right, and then I'll just say retry equals to retry if exception type. Okay, and then I'll just say requests dot exceptions dot timeout. Okay, comma requests dot exceptions dot connection error. Okay, this means that only retry for specific error types. Okay, so for example timeout. Okay, timeout is server. Timeout means what? My server took too long to respond. Or connection error, which couldn't connect to the server in the first place, right? We do not retry on the HTTP error. If it's a 404 or a 403 kind of error, we don't, because those are our fault, right? Retrying will not fix a wrong URL or a wrong parameter. Okay, so we have to take care of that. Okay, so the next async function along with this is fetch page. Okay, parameters will be passed here. Okay, which is nothing but the dictionary. Okay, and this gives me a dictionary in return. Okay, all right, async. Okay, and now what does this basically do? This makes one get request to the studies endpoint. Okay, the studies endpoint that we're going to define, it is going to make one get request here. Okay, and this is decorated. If you see this function, this async function that we are doing, it is decorated with the, see, retry is what? This is a decorator here, right? So this is decorated with retry from tenacity, which means if it fails with a timeout or a connection error, tenacity automatically calls it again up to max retries. Okay, now here at an argument level, if you check at an argument level, we are taking what? We are taking the query parameters, which are built by the build search params function that we have done. And what does it return? It returns a JSON response as a Python dictionary, and none if all the attempts are failed. Okay, in here what we'll do is we'll create another inner function. Okay, and now this inner function makes the actual HTTP request. So I'll just say that makes the actual HTTP request. Okay, and I'll just return here what? I'll return self dot session dot get, and what do I get? I get the base URL / studies. Okay, and the endpoint, and this is going to be what? This is the endpoint URL for searching studies, right? And then what do we pass? We pass the params. So I'll just say params, and then in timeout I'll just say request timeout. Okay, and then I'll just write a simple try except function and error exception handling. Okay, I'll just say response equals to await async io dot to underscore thread, and here I'll be passing the get function. Okay, which means what we're going to do is we're going to run the synchronous get inner function in the background thread. Okay, and we have already discussed async io dot to thread. Okay, it lets us use the synchronous libraries. What are the synchronous libraries? Let's say something like requests. Okay, inside the async code. Okay, so always remember, if you want to use a synchronous function inside an async, you use async io dot to underscore thread. Okay, so without blocking anything, okay, you are running the things. Okay, so await here means you pause until the thread finishes. Okay, but let the other async tasks run. Okay, and then I'll just say response dot raise, no, just a minute, yeah, response dot raise for status. Okay, which is going to give us the HTTPS code and HTTP status code. And what do we return? We return response dot JSON. Fantastic. And now we'll just put in the exception. So I'll say except exception, sorry, this will be except requests dot exceptions dot timeout, and then I'll just say logger dot warning. Okay, and I'll say request timed out after how many? The request timeout seconds, and then I'll just say retrying. Okay, if this error hits. Okay, and then I'll just say raise here, that's all. Okay, so we are going to say re-raise the exception so Tenacity knows how to retry. Okay, or knows to retry. So then I'll say except requests dot exceptions dot connection error, and then I'll just say logger dot warning, then I'll say connection error, and I'll say yeah, connection error, and I'll just say retrying. Okay, and I'll just say raise. Okay, re-raise for the same reason. Okay, let Tenacity retry. Okay, except requests dot exceptions dot HTTP error as E, and then I'll just log it. So I'll just say logger dot error. Okay, so I'll say HTTP error from API. Just a minute, yeah. Okay, and then I'll just say status equals to E dot response dot status code, and then I'll again take the URL. Sorry, I went into terminal. Okay, all right, and then I'll just say URL. Okay, and I'll just say E dot response dot URL. Okay, so if there's any error while fetching the URL, it will log that as well as an HTTP error, and it happens, right? At the end of the day, we are making API calls, and what are we going to return? We're going to return none. Okay, which means do not retry this. See, if it is an HTTP error, it makes no sense that it is going to be fixed by retrying. So we're not going to ask Tenacity to retry this. Okay, and then finally exception as E, log it again, and I'll just say unexpected error fetching page. Okay, and I'll just say error equals to E. Okay, and finally what does it return? It returns none. Okay, fantastic guys. So that was the entire code for clinical trial client.py, which is fantastic. Okay, we are writing very high quality code here. Okay, this is great Now let's move to the next step. As I said, go slowly and steadily. I totally understand it will be a huge learning curve for everyone. Okay, so go slowly and steadily. Okay, try to learn about new things. Try to learn what is async function, what are await functions, why did we use async await dot to underscore thread. Okay, when we are building parameters like this, what does it even mean? Try to learn on all these things. Okay, that will help you a lot in your career. All right. Okay, let's move to the next part.